Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I will be talking about Pixar's 2008 offering Wall-E. And the film is named for its main character. Wall-E is a trash compacting robot, alone on a garbage-strewn and lifeless planet Earth. Once he was one of an army of thousands of such robots who were left behind to clean up the planet after humanity abandoned it. The idea was that the humans would return to Earth once it was habitable once again, but as the decades and then centuries went by, most of the robots broke down. Wall-E has now been alone, except for his pet cockroach, for decades at least, possibly a century or more. Despite this, the industrious little guy continues his Sisyphean task of cleaning the planet, keeping himself functional as he does so with salvage from the many inactive robots around him. However, this class of robot was never intended to operate independently for so long, nor was it expected to conduct its own self-maintenance. The many decades have left the little robot with self-awareness and a quirky personality that his designers never planned for or anticipated. One day, Wall-E's routine of compressing trash and collecting interesting objects is broken by the arrival of a probe from outer space. The sole occupant of this probe, a sleek and otherworldly robot named Eve, with whom Wall-E is instantly smitten. His fascination with the newcomer, a probe robot sent to determine whether Earth is habitable once more, will ultimately lead both robots on an epic adventure with no less than the fate of humanity resting on their mechanical shoulders. So it's a good thing they're both a lot tougher than their diminutive size would suggest. Now, Wall-E didn't prove to be the same kind of merchandising blockbuster that other Pixar projects such as Cars and Toy Story had been, but it was still a commercial success for Pixar and Disney. The film recouped roughly triple its production budget at the worldwide box office and was very successful on home media. It sold over 7 million DVDs in the United States alone. The film was also a critical success. It won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, the second of 4 Pixar movies that would go back-to-back on winning that Oscar, and it was named one of the best films of 2008 by the American Film Institute. Not one of the best animated films, mind you, just one of the best films of any kind, which is high praise indeed. And to my mind, Wall-E thoroughly deserved its financial success and all of the praise. It's an excellent movie made with skill and conviction. If I really tried, could I find a few things to niggle about? Well, sure, I'm good at finding things to niggle about. But to be perfectly frank, I don't intend to bother in this case. This movie is fun, it's entertaining, and its tiny imperfections don't change that. So instead, let's focus on some of the things that this movie does right, and there are a lot of them, really. So, I'm going to come out and say it. If you don't like Wall-E, you have no soul. Okay. Maybe that's a little harsh, but you probably aren't human. You should definitely double check you're not a reptiloid from Arcturus B or something like that. This is a Pixar movie, and if there's anybody who knows how to tell a story, it's the Pixar crew. In the first half hour of this film, they take a pair of robots, each of whom largely speaks only 1 or 2 words, and they still deliver a charming little romantic story between them. I've seen plenty of films that couldn't do as an effective job as this with a pair of humans, triple the time, and 3,000 times as many dialogue options. But Pixar also stuffed this sequence with moments both touching and comedic, and frequently both, speaks to the skill and the craft of the people involved. It's a truly exceptional piece of near-silent storytelling, taking 2 clearly non-human characters, elegantly anthropomorphizing them, and then showing us how Wall-E's infatuation plays out. I've seen an awful lot of movies where the so-called romance amounts to, well, we've had 2 good-looking people on screen together for a bunch of time, so now they're going to kiss. Those films fail to show any depth of attraction, any burgeoning of affection, and that's not the case here. Wall-E's immediate infatuation is obvious, and his solicitous care for Eve when she goes into standby mode is a great sequence. It's, as I said before, both funny and touching. Now, the original concept for Wall-E was, what if mankind had to leave Earth and somebody forgot to turn off the last robot? Andrew Stanton came up with this in 1994, toward the end of making Toy Story, but he wasn't sure how to develop the narrative, and so it would be 8 years before he sat down to write a full script. Interestingly, one of his structural inspirations for this process was the film Alien. He borrowed that script style for visual descriptions of action, lots of short lines of a few words each, almost sort of haiku-like in format. However, that script and what we finally got are quite different. The first act was very similar, but the story thereafter went in a very different direction, involving strange Jello-like aliens and inspiration taken from Planet of the Apes. It's clear Stanton is quite the fan of old-school science fiction. He eventually jettisoned this idea. However, moving slowly through an extensive series of rewrites and visions towards the film we finally got. In fact, as is often the case with Pixar's films, changes continued to be made even after the complete film was ready for initial test screenings. Stanton and his team altered or even reversed key plot moments as a result of audience reaction from test screenings. So when you hear about a movie going in for rewrites after test screenings and reshoots after test screenings, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Pixar have been doing this all along, and they have a pretty good track record. Now, experienced writers often give pithy but on the face of it somewhat opaque piece of advice. Kill your darlings. This is, of course, not an incitement to murder your loved ones, at least not in the real world. Instead, it's an instruction to realise that your finished work as a whole is what matters, and that any part of the work that undermines or does not contribute to that whole must be jettisoned, no matter how hard you worked on it or how fond of it you are. The Wall-E team's willingness to kill their darlings, to set aside completed work and rewrite and reanimate, always striving to make their movie that little bit better structured, that fraction more impactful, is one of the keys to the success of this film. Over and over again, apparently minor elements come back in clever and impactful ways, and time and again, smart narrative decisions get made. And that's not an accident. That's years of hard work and really thinking about what's being done. It's razor-sharp stuff. And it's probably no surprise to hear that this movie looks great. It's a Pixar film, after all, and their visuals have always been at the forefront of 3D animation. But Wall-E doesn't simply look good. The visuals have been intricately and cleverly designed from the ground up, with a massive amount of care and effort put into every aspect of the visuals. It's this years of effort and really thinking hard again. Wall-E had almost twice as many storyboards as a typical Pixar film, for instance. An astonishing amount of time and attention was put into the use of light and colour, with the film subtly changing its palette to match the mood it wanted to convey. A conscious effort was made to emulate the look of classic science fiction films from the 60s and 70s, and Pixar's team even studied footage of Chernobyl and of cities that face serious garbage disposal issues to inform their design of the ruined wasteland of Earth. But they didn't stop there. They also obviously spent considerable time on developing a consistent and coherent design aesthetic for their fictional world. As the oldest model of robot in the movie, Wall-E also looks the most primitive and clunky. Eve is sleek and rounded in comparison, her shell a pristine white, and this design motif extends to sort of all of the customer-facing technological elements of her society. Even the janitorial robots are smooth and clean. It's only in the very bowels of the ship that we see the same kind of chunky, clunky aesthetics of Wall-E himself. There's a famous saying, popularly though inaccurately credited to Thomas Edison, that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Wall-E definitely has both of those ingredients. It's just a really good film. Next time, rather oddly written newexploitation film, This Is Not a Test from 1962. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you've seen today's movie, let me know what you thought of it.